He made the mistake. I paid the price. One day I was leading major projects. The next I was handed a termination letter. No warning, no explanation, just silence. But the truth couldn't stay buried. I had the emails, the receipts, everything. So I exposed it all. Would you stay quiet if your boss tried to ruin your life just to save his own? For a long time, I thought I was the problem. I thought maybe I'd made a mistake, maybe I wasn't performing well enough, or maybe I just wasn't senior leadership material in their eyes. That's what happens when you're suddenly replaced, and no one gives you a clear reason. You start second-guessing everything you've done. But the more I sat with it, the more I started to remember things I had seen over the years, and that's when it hit me. It wasn't just me. It never was. I started looking back on the stories of other people who had worked there. I remembered how one of the team, leads from operations, someone who had built processes from scratch and carried her team through chaos after chaos, was abruptly let go after she pointed out flaws in a new system the CEO loved. I remembered how our finance guy was blamed for a budgeting error that clearly came from the top. But since the CEO didn't want to admit he'd signed off without reading the numbers, he pinned it on someone else. These weren't random events. They were part of a pattern of pushing accountability downward and shielding the top at all costs. As I connected the dots, the picture became clearer. The CEO had a long history of throwing people under the bus to protect his own image. He never owned his mistakes. If a project failed, it was always the team's fault. If a client relationship soured, he'd blame the account manager, even if he had been the one who overpromised and underdelivered. And when people pushed back or tried to defend themselves, they were slowly iced out. Meetings stopped, projects got reassigned. Eventually, they were restructured out of the company, quietly, efficiently, and no one dared question it, because everyone was afraid they'd be next. That fear was real. I had felt it too. And for the longest time, I told myself to just keep my head down, work hard, and prove my value. But in a place like that, proving your value means nothing if the person in charge sees you as a threat, or worse, as a cost. The more experienced you are, the more you cost them. And if you speak up, you become a liability. I started hearing from former coworkers after I was let go. Messages started coming in, people I hadn't talked to in months, even years, reaching out to say they had been through something similar. Some were still trying to recover, others were still dealing with the trauma. It became clear that this wasn't just about corporate politics, it was emotional damage, and it ran deep. The company had built a culture where everyone was disposable, where loyalty was a one-way street, and where leadership hid behind flashy presentations and fake smiles, while real people were being pushed out in silence. That's when the injustice of it all really hit me. I realized I hadn't just been fired. I had been sacrificed to protect someone else's ego, just like so many others before me. And that realization was painful, but it also gave me clarity. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't wrong. I hadn't failed. I had been caught in a system that was never built to protect or value people like me. Once I saw that clearly, everything changed. I wasn't going to stay quiet. Because the more people stayed silent, the longer these toxic systems could keep doing what they were doing. And I knew someone had to say something. Someone had to stop the cycle. So I decided it might as well be me. For a while, I told myself to let it go. I tried to convince myself that speaking up wouldn't change anything, that maybe this was just how the corporate world worked, and I should focus on moving forward with my life. I kept repeating the same line. just walk away. But no matter how hard I tried to push it aside, something inside me wouldn't let it rest. Every time I thought about how I was replaced, how the CEO didn't even have the decency to explain why, it made my stomach turn. The anger didn't fade, it grew. I had always believed in keeping things professional. I believed that if you worked hard, treated people with respect, and stayed out of office politics, you'd be okay. That belief was shattered. My experience wasn't just a bad day at work or a disagreement with a boss. It was personal. It was a betrayal. I had given everything to that job. Nights, weekends, stress that followed me home and affected my health. Yet in the end, none of it mattered. I wasn't even spoken to like a human being. I was replaced without warning by someone who had done nothing to earn it, just because of a last name. And I knew it wasn't just me. I remembered all the stories from coworkers who were pushed out quietly, the ones who had stayed silent, the ones who had breakdowns, left defeated, or left with NDAs. They were too scared to break. I thought about the culture that let this happen again and again. A culture that praised overwork and punished anyone who asked for support. A culture where speaking up meant putting a target on your back. And I realized if I didn't say something, this would keep happening. People would continue to suffer in silence. But that didn't mean I wasn't scared. I was. I thought about what might happen if I went public. Would people believe me? Would I be called bitter or dramatic? Would companies in the future avoid hiring me, thinking I was trouble? I went back and forth with myself, more times than I can count. I didn't want to throw my career away. I didn't want to burn every bridge I'd spent years building. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, wondering if I'd survive the fall. Then came the tipping point. It was a message from a former coworker, someone I hadn't spoken to in months. She told me how she'd seen what happened to me and how it reminded her of her own experience, being pushed out after a mental health break. She told me she still felt broken from it. And then she said something that hit me in the chest. I wish I had said something back then. Maybe if I had, they wouldn't have done it to you. That was the moment I knew I couldn't stay quiet. I didn't go looking for the emails. They were just there, sitting in my inbox like a ticking time bomb, unread for days, because I hadn't had the stomach to go through everything after being fired. But one night, I couldn't sleep. My head was spinning with everything that had happened. How fast it all went down, how cold it felt, how unfair it was. I opened my laptop and started combing through old messages, trying to make sense of it all. That's when I found them. There were threads between Bill, the CEO, and senior managers, emails I had been CC'd on by mistake. At the time, I hadn't even registered what they meant. But now, with everything that had happened, the words hit differently. They talked about downsizing high-cost personnel, replacing senior roles with low-budget hires, and even hinted at protecting leadership credibility in the event of fallout. And then there it was, an email discussing me by name. It said I'd become a financial liability, and firing me would eliminate risk exposure after a project that in truth he had messed up. I was the scapegoat. Reading that email felt like a punch in the chest. My hands were shaking. I knew I had done nothing wrong. I had followed his orders on that project, even though I had concerns. And now there it was in writing. They were planning to blame me for the fallout, fire me, replace me, move on like it never happened. The anger that had been building inside of me finally had a trigger. It wasn't paranoia, it wasn't bad luck, it was calculated. But then came the harder part, figuring out what to do with it. I sat with those emails for days, staring at them, rereading every line. A part of me wanted to delete them and walk away. I'd always been the kind of person who played fair, who followed the rules. Leaking private emails? It felt wrong. It felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. What if I made it worse? What if no one cared? Or worse, what if people thought I was the problem? The ethical weight of it hit me hard. I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice. But in moments like that, the line between the two gets blurry. I kept asking myself, if I stay quiet, am I just as guilty? Am I letting him do this to someone else? And every time I thought about the coworkers who were quietly pushed out before me, the ones who didn't have any proof, who just had to swallow the pain and move on, I felt like I didn't have a choice. I had to speak. When I finally made the decision, I didn't feel brave. I felt sick. I copied the email threads, blacked out names where I could, and attached them to a long, honest post about what had happened, about the pattern, the toxic culture, and how leadership treated people like numbers on a spreadsheet. I didn't name the company directly, but anyone who worked there knew exactly what I was talking about. My finger hovered over the post button for what felt like forever. My heart was racing. I thought about my career, about the people still working there, about my family. But I also thought about my dignity, about the truth, about how silence only helps the people who abuse their power. So I hit send. At that moment, I didn't feel powerful. I felt exposed, vulnerable, terrified. But I also felt a little free. Because for the first time in weeks, I wasn't pretending. Everything was okay. I had stood up, not just for myself, but for everyone else who'd been steamrolled by that place. Whatever came next, at least I could say I didn't stay silent. The moment I hit send, everything changed. I knew I had crossed a line, but I also knew it was the only way to be heard. Those emails, the ones that proved the CEO had made the mistake and then used me as the scapegoat, were too important to stay hidden. Within hours of the leak, it spread like wildfire. I hadn't even expected it to blow up the way it did. But by the next morning, people across the company were already talking about it. By that evening, it had reached the public. Former employees started resharing the screenshots. Anonymous posts started flooding LinkedIn and Twitter, validating what I had shared. People who had stayed quiet for years were now stepping up with their own stories, some horrifying, some just heartbreaking. It wasn't just about me anymore. This became a conversation about how people in power manipulate those beneath them to protect themselves. It was about a system that chews up good employees and spits them out the moment they become inconvenient or too expensive. Of course, the company didn't just sit back. Bill, the CEO, tried to flip the narrative. His first move was damage control. They sent out a carefully worded internal email, calling the leak a breach of confidentiality and saying that the emails were taken out of context. Then they tried the legal threats. I got a notice saying I had violated company policy and might face legal consequences. It shook me, I won't lie. For a moment, I wondered if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. But then I checked my inbox, and it was full of support. Messages from people I didn't even know, thanking me. Former employees who had also been blamed for things they didn't do. Strangers who had gone through similar betrayals in other workplaces. I wasn't alone. The more they tried to shut me down, the worse it got for them. Journalists picked up the story. Several media outlets reached out to verify the leak and ask for interviews. HR insiders, former board members, even one ex-executive chimed in anonymously. confirming that this wasn't a one-time mistake, it was a pattern. The truth was finally out in the open, and no PR statement could undo it. Still, not everyone supported what I did. Some people called me a troublemaker, said I should have handled it internally. A few accused me of attention-seeking. That stung a little because they didn't know what it had taken for me to speak up. They didn't see the nights I sat awake questioning myself, wondering if I should just disappear and start over somewhere new. But then I'd get a message from someone saying, "Because of your post, I found the courage to quit," or "You made me feel less crazy," and it would remind me why I did it in the first place. Inside the company, morale plummeted. People were scared, but they were also angry. You could feel the shift happening. Employees started pushing back, asking for transparency, demanding better treatment. Some even began organizing quietly, trying to make sure no one else would be blindsided like I was. I never thought a few screenshots could turn an entire company upside down. But when I leaked those emails, the ones that showed the CEO blaming me for a mistake he made just to protect himself, everything changed. It was like someone had thrown a grenade into a carefully curated PR bubble. The truth hit harder than I imagined, and once it was out, there was no putting it back. At first, it was chaos. People inside the company were stunned. Some couldn't believe it. Others said they weren't surprised at all. But something shifted almost immediately. For the first time, employees began talking openly. In meetings, in group chats, even on public platforms. People who had once kept their heads down out of fear were now asking questions, demanding transparency, and sharing their own stories of being used, silenced, or pushed out. I think a lot of people had been carrying their own version of what I went through, just waiting for someone else to say it out loud first. And the company, it couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. HR scrambled to do damage control. The internal tone of communication changed overnight. Suddenly, everything was about support, transparency, and employee well-being. Of course, most people saw right through it, but the pressure was real. They had no choice but to start changing how things worked, or risk losing even more of the talent they had left. Then came the real consequences. The CEO Bill went quiet for a few days, which in itself was telling. No bold emails, no LinkedIn posts, just silence. But outside the office walls, the backlash was loud. Articles started circulating. Former employees shared their stories online, tagging the company. Clients began asking questions. Even a few of our biggest sponsors pulled out, saying they couldn't support a company that didn't align with their values. Eventually, the board had to step in. From what I heard through contacts still inside, the pressure became impossible to ignore. Bill was called into multiple meetings. Shareholders were furious. There was talk of investigating past internal complaints, including some that had mysteriously disappeared over the years. And while the company never confirmed it publicly, Mark was quietly removed from all major decision-making before being asked to resign a few weeks later. I won't lie, there was a strange satisfaction in knowing that he was finally being held accountable, not just for what he did to me, but for what he did to so many others. I didn't feel victorious. I felt relieved. Like something heavy I had been carrying alone had finally been seen and shared. But the real change, the kind that mattered, wasn't just about one man losing his job. It was about the ripple effect that truth created. Inside the company, there were actual changes. They introduced a new complaint handling system, hired a third-party firm to evaluate internal processes, started leadership training focused on ethical management. Was it perfect? Number, but it was a start. And outside the company, it sparked conversations too. I got messages from people in completely different industries saying the leak gave them courage. Some even said they were preparing to expose toxic practices at their own workplaces. It was like pulling one thread had started to unravel a whole network of silence and fear. Sometimes people ask me if I'd do it again, knowing the risks, and I always say yes. Because the truth didn't just change everything for me, it changed everything for a lot of people. For the first time in a long time, the ones at the bottom finally had the power to shake the ones at the top. When the truth came out, it didn't just shake the company, it shattered everything my boss had spent years building. For a long time, he'd been protected by power and connections. People feared him. No one questioned his decisions. He made himself untouchable. But when those emails leaked and people saw the proof for themselves, how he tried to pin his own failure on me, everything started to fall apart for him. His reputation took the first blow. At first, he tried to act like it wasn't a big deal, sent out a vague statement talking about miscommunication and internal misunderstandings. But the internet doesn't forget, and neither do the people you've wronged. Comments poured in. Screenshots spread like wildfire. Former employees began sharing their experiences, and suddenly it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about years of unfair treatment, manipulation, and cover-ups that he thought would never surface. His name was attached to every headline, and not in the way he was used to. Then the board stepped in. From what I heard through mutual contacts, they were livid. Not just because of what he did, but because he got caught doing it. Investors started backing away. A few big clients terminated their contracts. There was a ripple effect, and at the center of it all was him. Eventually, the board had no choice. They asked him to step down quietly to minimize the damage, but the truth was he was forced out. No farewell speech, no legacy celebration, just a cold internal memo saying he'd decided to pursue other opportunities. Everyone knew what that really meant. He wasn't leaving on his own terms. He was pushed out because he had become a liability. There were whispers about legal consequences too, not because of me directly, but because the leaked emails triggered other investigations. HR complaints that had been swept under the rug were pulled out again. Some former employees came forward with serious claims: wrongful termination, discrimination, unpaid overtime. It turned into a full-blown crisis, and he had nowhere to hide. Watching it unfold, I won't lie, it was emotional. I had been fired, humiliated, and made to feel like I was nothing. For months, I questioned my worth. I wondered if I had made a mistake by speaking out. But seeing the truth finally catch up to him, that gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Not revenge, not satisfaction from watching someone else suffer. Just peace in knowing that I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. I was right to stand up, to speak out, to not let it slide. It still stings when I think about how I was treated. That part doesn't just go away, but I know this much. If I hadn't leaked those emails, he would have gotten away with it. Again, just like he had before, using people as shields, stepping on anyone who made him look bad, rewriting stories to protect his image. This time, though, the truth was louder than him. He lost everything because of his own actions. He tried to sacrifice me to save himself, and in the end, it was that exact move that exposed him. That's the thing about karma. It doesn't always come fast, but when it does, it's thorough. And for the first time in a long time, I could breathe. Not just because he was gone, but because I finally felt seen, heard, and maybe most importantly, believed. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.